Some people spend years trying to heal their pain, while still thinking in the very same way that destroyed them. They change advice, methods, and fancy words to describe what they feel, but inside they are still a house with no owner, the door wide open to noise, fear, and any thought that walks in and takes control. And when a mind is left like that, abandoned to its own disorder, life as a whole begins to rot in silence. The question is brutal but necessary. Who is running your life right now, you or the chaos you have allowed to grow inside you? Many people believe healing means understanding what happened to them, talking about it over and over, naming the emptiness and waiting for relief. But not all understanding sets you right, and not all help transforms you. Sometimes the problem is not that you lack an explanation, but structure. Not that you lack comfort, but inner command. That is why these 10 Stoic habits are worth more than 20 years of therapy for someone who is tired of feeling fragile, scattered, and at the mercy of themselves, because there are pains that are not resolved by being observed, but by being disciplined. In this video, you are going to discover a much more demanding and much cleaner way to regain power over your mind, your character, and the way you stand in the world. Not through modern formulas that stroke your wound while leaving it untouched, but through a wisdom more than 2,000 years old, Stoicism. We are going to step into practices that bring order to thought, harden the spirit, and restore dignity to anyone who has spent too long living on impulse, fear, or dependence. And when we reach the end, you will understand that real relief does not begin when someone saves you, but when you decide to stop living like someone who needs saving. I'm Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Stay until the end, because we are going to walk through 10 habits that can completely change the way you think, endure, and live. And the last one will not simply be one more habit, but the point where everything before it stops being reflection, and finally becomes a way of life. Most people are not tired because of everything that happened to them. They are exhausted because of everything they think about what happened to them. And that difference changes everything, because yes, there are real wounds, but there is also a mind that takes that wound, repeats it, exaggerates it, interprets it without rest, and ends up building a prison far larger than the original event. A mind without direction turns any problem into an identity. It no longer says, I'm going through something difficult, but I am this pain. And when someone reaches that point, they stop living in reality and begin inhabiting a diseased narrative, a distorted version of themselves fed by confusion, self-pity, and inner noise. That is why we had to begin here with the first lesson of this journey. The mind grows sick from a lack of direction. When you do not govern your attention, anything will do it for you. The latest rejection governs you, the latest insult, a comment from someone who is not even at peace with themselves, fear of the future, guilt over the past, constant comparison, the ridiculous need to feel understood by everyone. And of course, then you say you are broken, that you are lost, that you do not know what is happening to you. How could you know when you have spent too long letting into your mind everything you should have filtered out? People talk about peace of mind as if it were a gift fallen from heaven, when in reality it is a border, and a border that is not protected ends up invaded. Marcus Aurelius, who spoke not from the comfort of retreat but from the burden of ruling an empire and battling his own thoughts, wrote that the happiness of life depends on the quality of what you allow to live in your mind. It is not a pretty sentence to hang on a wall. It is a warning, because if you allow cowardly, impulsive, chaotic, and servile thoughts in, you cannot expect a life that is steady, clear, and dignified. To expect serenity with a disordered mind is like asking for a harvest from land you never worked. Then people are surprised to feel miserable every day. What an unsolvable mystery, to feed yourself mental trash and then expect clarity. Here an uncomfortable truth appears, one that few people accept. Not every thought deserves respect just because it appeared inside you. Not everything you feel reveals some deep truth. Not everything you imagine deserves obedience. Sometimes what you call intuition is fear. Sometimes what you call sensitivity is a lack of discipline. Sometimes what you call anxiety is a mind with no training, accustomed to dramatizing everything. And what happens when you never question that? You end up kneeling before every inner impulse as if it were a sacred command. And no. The Stoic begins to heal the day they understand that between what they think and what they decide to do, there must be an inner authority. That is why the first habit is not about running from pain, distracting yourself more effectively, or learning new words to explain your chaos. It is about giving the mind direction. Getting up and asking yourself what deserves your energy today, which thought strengthens you and which degrades you, which interpretation makes you more master of yourself and which turns you into a slave. Direction means choosing. It means stopping your reactions as a wounded animal and beginning to judge as a conscious human being. It means accepting that your peace depends not only on what happens to you, but on the quality of the order you impose within yourself. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that was not poetry. It was diagnosis. Many people do not live tormented by facts, but by the mental scripts they build around them. They rehearse arguments that never happened, catastrophes that never arrived, abandonments that may never come. They consume themselves in advance. They ruin themselves on their own. And then they call that inability to stop their own inner machinery sensitivity. Stoicism does not come to numb you. It comes to tell you something more useful. If you do not bring order to your mind will use you against yourself. So this first habit demands a serious decision. Stop treating your inner world like an abandoned room where everything gets in, everything stays, and everything rules. Your mind needs discernment, vigilance, and command. It needs a voice that says enough when a thought turns poisonous, and go on when something appears that builds character. Because a life without mental direction does not need great tragedies to collapse. Everyday noise is enough. And whoever does not learn to govern themselves within will end up looking outside for a rescue no one can give them. After beginning to bring order to the mind, a second cleansing appears, perhaps an even harsher one, because it touches one of the most destructive obsessions of the human being, wanting to control what was never theirs to control. People, outcomes, timing, opinions, goodbyes, betrayals, recognition, destiny. Most people live exhausted not because of everything they have to carry, but because they keep trying to move with their own hands things that were never under their command. And that constant struggle drains the soul, rots character, and turns existence into an absurd war against reality. That is why we now enter the second principle of this video. Separate what depends on you from what will never obey you. Epictetus, who knew the humiliation of slavery before he taught inner freedom, left behind one of the sharpest ideas in all of Stoic philosophy. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. It sounds simple, but almost no one lives as if they truly understand it. People wear themselves out, trying to control what others feel, how others see them, when an opportunity arrives, how long a relationship lasts, what someone decides after they are already gone. And while they waste themselves in that useless battle, they abandon the only things that are truly theirs. Their judgment, their conduct, their word, their response, their discipline. It is a miserable irony. They neglect the helm while shouting at the sea. Look at how much energy is lost there. You wait for people to understand you, to value you, to respond the way you want, for life to cooperate with your emotional timetable. And when it does not happen, you get furious, depressed, convinced you are a victim of the world. But the world never signed a contract to obey your desires. No one promised you perfect reciprocity, immediate justice, or neat endings. Are you really going to hand your peace over to everything you cannot govern? Are you really going to place the center of your life in the hands of people, circumstances, and timing that do exactly as they please? That is not sensitivity. That is inner exile. Massimo Pigliucci, one of the contemporary thinkers who has best explained this Stoic inheritance, said that serenity is born when we clearly distinguish between what depends on our judgment and what belongs to the impersonal course of the world. That is where dignity lies. Not in winning every battle, but in stopping the fight against the ones that were never yours to fight. The problem is that the ego hates this idea because the ego feeds on the illusion of control. It wants to manipulate the story, the timing, other people's emotions, the final outcome. And when it discovers it cannot, it throws a philosophical tantrum and calls it deep suffering. Separating these two spheres does not mean resignation or passivity. It means recovering real power. Because the day you stop demanding obedience from the outside world, all that energy returns to you. You no longer spend it trying to change someone who does not want to change, begging for results or arguing with finished facts. You invest it in your posture, your response, your self-command. Suddenly you understand that you cannot decide whether someone betrays you, but you can decide whether that betrayal makes you wiser or more bitter. You cannot prevent a loss, but you can choose whether that loss destroys you or matures you. That is where real freedom begins. Cleanthes spoke of willingly following the course of nature so as not to be dragged like a slave by what you should have accepted. That hurts, because acceptance does not flatter the ego. Acceptance means recognizing that there are doors you will not force open, timing you will not speed up, people you will not change, and endings you will not negotiate. But that acceptance does not make you smaller. It puts you in order. It brings you back to the exact place where you can still act with firmness, your character. And when character awakens, desperation starts losing ground. This habit may seem cold at first, but in truth it is compassionate towards you. It pulls you out of useless exhaustion and returns you to fruitful responsibility. You stop asking so much why the world does not respond the way you want. You begin asking yourself how you are going to respond to the world you were given. And that question is infinitely nobler, stronger, and more useful. Because as long as you keep demanding that reality change so you can be at peace, you will remain its hostage. But when you understand that your task is not to control everything, but to master yourself in the middle of everything, something settles inside you. And for the first time in a long time, you stop fighting life and start standing firmly within it. Once you stop wasting energy trying to control the world, you discover the enemy that was always closest to you. The voice that speaks inside you without asking permission, and if you do not examine it, ends up deciding for you. Most people think they are thinking, when in reality they are only obeying automatic associations, old fears, inherited judgments, and impulsive conclusions that were never reviewed. And because all of that happens in silence, they treat it as truth. They believe every inner sentence, every suspicion, every imagined humiliation, every dark forecast. That is how an invisible tyranny is built. We have reached the third point of this video, and it is this: guard your thoughts like you would protect a fortress. A fortress does not fall first because of a great attack. It falls because of a poorly closed gate, weak vigilance, a failure to take the intruder seriously. The same happens to you. You are not destroyed all at once by a single tragedy. You are worn down by the thoughts you let in without examination. I can't. It's too late. They're going to let me down. I'll never get out of this. I need their approval. If they reject me, I lose my worth. Each of those ideas seems small, almost harmless, but when you let them move freely, they end up organizing your identity. Then you wonder why you act out of fear, why you doubt everything, why you betray yourself. Well, because you have left the command in the hands of a voice that was never trained to govern. Epictetus insisted on something decisive. It is not events that carry you away, but the assent you give to the impression that arrives in your mind. That means there is a space of sovereignty between the thought and you. But almost no one uses it. The moment a dark idea appears, they treat it like a revelation. The moment they feel an impulse, they turn it into a command. The moment the mind invents a catastrophe, they begin living as though it had already happened. Donald Robertson, who has connected Stoicism and modern psychology with real clarity, reminds us that questioning our automatic interpretations is the first step in weakening the power of irrational thoughts. Of course, that requires a discipline that almost no one practices today, because it is easier to call yourself an overthinker than to admit that you have stopped watching yourself. Ask yourself something seriously. When a thought accuses you, diminishes you, or pushes you toward panic, do you examine it, or do you open the door and set the table for it? Because a good part of your destiny is decided right there. An unguarded mind turns suspicions into certainties, emotions into arguments, and wounds into a permanent identity, and then it expects to live in peace. Brilliant plan. The Stoic does something else. They stop and ask, is this true, or only an impression? Does this strengthen me or degrade me? Does this deserve my assent? That small act of examination may seem minor, but it changes the entire structure of character. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he had to firmly watch what he allowed to live in his mind. It was not paranoia, it was inner hygiene. Because an idea can enter as a visitor and end up as a tyrant. If every day you repeat thoughts of defeat, grievance, inferiority, or dependence, you are not describing your reality, you are creating it. And guarding does not mean repressing or pretending everything is fine. It means not blindly believing everything that appears inside you. It means bringing your thoughts before the court of reason before allowing them to direct your conduct. When you learn this habit, something hardens inside you in a healthy way. You no longer react so easily. You no longer swallow whole the first judgment that appears. You no longer let a passing emotion write your destiny. You begin to live with a clear distance from your own inner noise, and that distance is worth gold because it gives back an authority you had surrendered without noticing. The fortress is still yours, but now it is guarded. Now not just anything gets in. Now not just anything gets to rule. If by this point this video is already showing you that many of your wounds come not only from what you lived through, but also from what you have allowed yourself to think without vigilance, subscribe and leave a like. And write in the comments the phrase, "I govern my mind," along with the country you are listening from, because that declaration marks the beginning of a real transformation. Stay until the end, because there are still several decisive keys ahead, and the last one will completely reframe everything you have heard so far. After learning to distrust thoughts that arrive without examination, it is time to confront another point where most people ruin their peace with impressive efficiency: immediate reaction. Some people do not live, they detonate. Everything pushes them, everything sets them off. Everything tears a response out of them before consciousness has time to even sit at the table. One word, one gesture, one message, one delay, one criticism, and they are already saying too much, over-explaining, hurting too much, or humiliating themselves on impulse. Then they say it was the moment, as if the moment were to blame for their lack of self-command. And that brings us to the fourth lesson of this journey: practice silence before reacting. The silence Stoicism speaks of is not shyness or cowardice. It is a space of power. It is the moment when you do not allow the first jolt to decide for you. Most people fear that space because there they cannot hide behind impulse. There they have to face themselves. They have to recognize that many of their wounds were not born from what happened, but from how quickly they responded. A conversation breaks, a relationship tightens, an opportunity is lost, a dignity is lowered. All because they could not endure a few seconds of pause. A character can become astonishingly fragile when it needs to react instantly in order to feel strong. Seneca, who wrote with enormous clarity about anger, warned that if it is not controlled from its very first impulse, it ends up ruling the one who thought they were using it. That is the trap. You think expressing yourself without a filter sets you free, when in reality it gives you away. You think letting it all out makes you authentic, when many times it only makes you predictable. And anyone who is predictable in emotion is easy to dismantle. The man or woman who cannot stay quiet at the right moment always ends up revealing their weakness before they have understood the situation. By contrast, the one who knows how to stop preserves something decisive: inner margin. Think of how many times a pause would have saved you from embarrassment, from an unnecessary fight, from a sentence that then weighed on you for months. How many times was it not a response that was needed, but observation? How many times was courage to speak, not what was missing, but maturity to stay silent? Modern culture adores the quick reaction, the immediate opinion, the emotional release in real time. Very spontaneous, very genuine, very liberating, until it is time to clean up the wreckage. The Stoic walks a different path. They know that between stimulus and response there is a space, and that freedom is decided in that space. Viktor Frankl, though he was not an ancient Stoic, expressed an idea deeply aligned with this tradition when he said that between stimulus and response lies our power to choose. It is not a decorative phrase, it is a tool for moral survival. Because if you do not inhabit that space, your wound, your ego, or your fear will. And when they are the ones responding, they almost always leave destruction behind them. Practicing silence before reacting is training yourself so that pain is not the one speaking in your name. Often you do not need a grand solution, but an interruption. Breathe. Delay. Look again. Let the initial blow settle a little before deciding what deserves a response and what deserves calm contempt. Some offenses die if you do not feed them. Some conflicts reveal themselves as ridiculous when you do not step immediately onto their stage. Some people only have power over you as long as they can rush you. That is why prudent silence is not passivity. It is selection. It is character. It is refusing to turn every provocation into an obligation. Seneca also left behind a simple and brutal observation. We often regret having spoken, but rarely regret having remained silent with prudence. And there lies the medicine. This is not about becoming mute or distant, but about learning to respond from a present mind, not from a hijacked nervous system. When you make silence a discipline before reaction, your life starts to gather less dirt. You make fewer useless mistakes. You give away less power. You preserve more dignity. And in a world full of people who explode over anything, that deliberate calm stops being a detail and becomes a higher form of strength. When a person has begun to order their mind, to distinguish what they control, to watch their thoughts, and to stop reacting like a nervous spring, a quieter test appears: their relationship with comfort. Because a mind can seem stable while everything is easy, while it has stimulation, satisfied whims, available distractions, and small pleasures within reach. The problem begins when something is missing, when something becomes uncomfortable, when something demands sustained effort. That is when it becomes clear whether there is character or simply dependence with good packaging. Now it is time to move to the fifth key in this video. Train yourself in discomfort so you do not become a slave to pleasure. We live in an age that confuses well-being with the complete absence of friction. If something is hard, it annoys. If something takes time, it frustrates. If something requires discipline, it gets abandoned. Everything must be fast, smooth, easy, stimulating, and if possible, without sacrifice. And then people wonder why they are so emotionally weak, why every rejection breaks them, why every delay irritates them, why every lack sinks them. Well, because they have made pleasure their master and discomfort their enemy. And a human being who cannot bear the slightest contact with difficulty ends up selling themselves for scraps of relief. Musonius Rufus, one of the most sober and least indulgent Stoic teachers, taught that character is not formed in comfort, but in the deliberate practice of what we would rather avoid. That sentence should haunt anyone who wants a solid life, because you do not become strong by thinking about strength. You become strong when you do, again and again, what the softer part of you does not want to do. Getting up when you do not feel like it, staying silent when you want to unload everything, holding to a routine when impulse tells you to break it, giving up immediate pleasure to protect a greater good. That is where freedom begins. Modern slavery does not always wear visible chains. Sometimes it takes the form of appetites without self-command. You need constant entertainment, constant validation, constant food, constant noise, constant stimulation. You need to feel good now, even if that now weakens you later. And so you build a life that looks pleasant on the outside and miserable on the inside. What is the use of having every comfort within reach if you cannot tolerate emptiness, effort, or waiting? What kind of peace can someone have when they depend so much on feeling comfortable? That is not peace. It is well-supplied fragility. Musonius also said that whoever becomes accustomed to living simply does not fear poverty, because they have learned that well-being does not depend on abundance. That idea goes far beyond money. It speaks of training yourself not to need too much, of not turning every desire into a demand, of discovering that you can live with less stimulation, less approval, less indulgence, less whim. And when you learn that, something powerful happens. The world loses some of its ability to manipulate you. You are no longer so easy to buy, so predictable, so easy to tame. Pleasure is not the enemy. The problem is submission to pleasure. The problem is when your will becomes incapable of holding on to what is good unless it comes with immediate enjoyment. Then you leave the right path because it is boring. You abandon effort because it is uncomfortable. You leave truth because it hurts. You leave discipline because it demands too much. And so, little by little, you become someone pleasant to yourself in the short term, but useless when real tests of life arrive. The Stoic does not despise enjoyment. They simply refuse to kneel before it. That is why training yourself in discomfort is a form of medicine. Choosing from time to time what is sober, austere, difficult, not to punish yourself, but to remind your spirit that it is still in command. Walking when you could avoid the effort. Waiting without filling every empty space with distraction. Voluntarily giving up something that rules you just to prove to yourself that you can. It seems small, but it is not. Every act like that takes power away from impulse and gives it back to character. Cleanthes said that nothing great endures without constant effort. because virtue is a daily conquest and not a permanent possession. There is the heart of this habit. It is not about hardening yourself so you become cold, but so you become free. Free from whim, from attachment to comfort, from the weakness that is born when everything in your life must feel good for you to keep going. Because the day you learn to live with a certain amount of discomfort without breaking, pleasure stops ruling you. And on that day, even if many do not understand it, you begin to resemble a truly strong person. After learning not to live enslaved to pleasure, this journey enters a place many people avoid because it truly makes them uncomfortable. The fragility of everything they love. The ordinary mind wants to live as if nothing will ever end, as if relationships, the body, youth, health, the home, routine, and life itself were guaranteed by default. But that childish fantasy comes at a high cost. You make what is valuable seem trivial. You become arrogant with time. You cling like a desperate person when something changes, and when loss arrives, it finds you morally naked. Here we enter the sixth principle of this video. Remember every day that you are going to lose everything. This is not an invitation to sadness, but to clarity. The problem is not thinking about loss. The problem is living in denial of it until reality tears down the stage set. People kiss their children, speak with their parents, look at their partner, use their bodies, live their days, as if all of it was stable, as if tomorrow were guaranteed. And because they feel they own what is temporary, they stop being grateful for it, stop honoring it, and begin complaining about trivial things with almost comical insolence. Then life touches what they love most, and only then, suddenly, they discover the value of what they had been treating as guaranteed. Epictetus was brutally clear when he taught that you should not wish for your child, your friend, or your partner to be immortal, but instead train your will to accept their mortal nature. It sounds harsh because it is, but it is also deeply liberating. Because when you stop demanding eternity from what is fragile by nature, you begin to love better. You love with more presence, with less possession, with less naivety. You no longer embrace from the delusion that nothing will change, but from the awareness that everything can change. And that, far from diminishing the bond, makes it more real. Seneca wrote that we should rehearse in the mind the absence of what we love, not to harden ourselves, but to learn to value without attachment what we enjoy today. That distinction matters. The Stoic does not look at death in order to grow bitter, but to put priorities in order. Pierre Hadot explained it well. Remembering our finitude is not a morbid exercise, but a radical clarification of what truly matters. What would you still argue about today with such arrogance if you remembered that you or the other person might not be here tomorrow? What ridiculous anxiety would still seem so enormous if you truly understood how brief all of this is? Many of our daily miseries survive only because we forget how fragile we are. This habit also tears away a dangerous illusion, the belief that there will always be time to ask for forgiveness, to change, to say what needs to be said, to start living better, to be grateful, to grow up, to return. But no, there will not always be time, and you do not need to be pessimistic to understand that. You only need to observe life without mental sedatives. Every day people lose things they thought were safe. Every day someone discovers too late that they postponed what mattered most while chasing nonsense. And even seeing that, we go on acting as though we are exempt. An impressive level of self-deception. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that everything we see changes quickly and soon ceases to exist. He did not do that to sink into depression, but to remain sober. Because the person who remembers transience lives differently, speaks differently, chooses differently. They take less offense, give more thanks, cling with less blindness, and complain with less arrogance. They understand that nothing belongs to them permanently, and that makes them more reverent toward the present, more careful, more awake, more mature. Remembering that you are going to lose everything also trains you not to completely collapse when loss does come, because it will come in one form or another. You will not be able to avoid every goodbye, every change, or every ending, but you can avoid being found living like a spoiled child who never accepted the basic law of existence. You can prepare yourself inwardly. You can love without possessing, enjoy without falling asleep, be grateful without expecting a guarantee. And that does not take away your humanity, it gives it back to you. Because only when you accept that everything is fragile do you stop living half asleep. and only then do you truly begin to be present with what you still have. If you accept that everything is fragile, and that each day can take away something you assumed was secure, then one inevitable consequence appears. You can no longer afford to live on autopilot. You cannot end a day and drift into sleep like someone turning off a machine without reviewing what it did, what it said, what it allowed, and what it degraded in itself. Because a life without examination does not just become disordered, it becomes corrupted. It fills with small compromises, elegant self-deceptions, excuses repeated until they start sounding like truth. And so, little by little, a person stops being the owner of their own character without even noticing when it happened. This is the seventh step you must understand. Review yourself at night with brutal honesty. Night has something the day rarely grants: silence. And in that silence, masks fall more easily. The motion is gone, the distraction is gone, the rush that helped you justify yourself is gone. It is just you, facing yourself. And that scene is uncomfortable because there it does not matter whether you seem like a good person, sound deep, or say that you are working on yourself. Something else matters there. What you did today with your mind, your words, your impulses, your time. The Stoic examination is not a lovely self-care ritual. It is a moral audit. It is sitting before your own tribunal without a defense attorney. Seneca practiced something very close to this. At the end of the day, he questioned himself with severity. What fault he had corrected, what passion he had resisted, in what way he had become better. He did not do it to humiliate himself, but so he would not live blindly. Because whoever does not examine themselves repeats themselves, and whoever repeats themselves without awareness ends up calling their oldest flaws their personality. That's just how I am, some people say, as if that settles the matter. No, you are that way because you have allowed yourself to be that way too many times without answering to yourself. Brutal honesty begins when you stop dressing up your character with psychological explanations and start naming your failures for what they are. What did you avoid today out of cowardice? Where did you talk too much? At what moment did you betray your own judgment in order to please someone? What petty thought did you feed? Where did you behave like someone smaller than the person you claim you want to be? These questions are uncomfortable, of course, but that is exactly why they are useful. Most people would rather fall asleep without looking at anything because they are afraid of discovering that they have spent years living beneath their own dignity. And so they continue, accumulating badly lived days with admirable skill. Then they want deep transformation without passing through the basic moment of facing themselves truthfully, as if the soul corrected itself out of courtesy. Chrysippus argued that a life at odds with itself is proof of a poorly trained reason. And that is exactly what the nightly examination comes to correct. It forces you to notice the distance between what you say you value and what you actually practice, between your speech and your conduct, between your ideal and your routine, not so that you hate yourself, but so that you stop living divided. Because the great poison for many people is not open wickedness, but tolerated inconsistency. They know what they should do, yet allow themselves the opposite with obscene ease. Then they want inner peace, hard to achieve when you keep signing treaties with your own weakness. Now, reviewing yourself with brutal honesty does not mean becoming your own executioner. It is not about ending every night beating yourself up with guilt, but about extracting direction. The question is not only where you failed, but what you will do tomorrow to correct it. The Stoic does not examine themselves in order to dwell on the fall, but to keep it from becoming a habit. That is why this habit is so transformative, because it turns every day into training material. You no longer live at the mercy of moral chance. You live learning, refining, correcting. You become less naive with yourself, but also more capable of governing yourself. Aulus Gellius passed down an ancient maxim that sums it up well. The prudent man examines himself before judging others harshly. There is enormous clarity in that. When you observe yourself rigorously, you stop wasting so much energy pointing at the world. You begin by putting your own house in order. And a person who ends their days by looking honestly at their own conduct begins to change in a way that does not need spectacle. They become steadier, more consistent, more uncomfortable for their former self. Because each night stops being just another ending and becomes a demanding question. Today, did you live like someone worthy of your own conscience, or did you simply survive while disguising the same old patterns? After examining yourself honestly, You uncover a dependency that often stays hidden, even in people who think they are very self-aware. The habit of placing peace in other people's hands. Many live waiting for a call, an apology, a reply, approval, or different behavior from someone else in order to finally feel calm. As if peace were a prize someone else had to hand them. And while they hold onto that fantasy, they remain chained. Their inner state rises and falls according to other people's moods, according to what they receive, according to what they lack. We have reached one of the most important keys in this video. Number 8. Stop asking others for the peace that can only be born within you. There are people who do not really want peace, even though they swear they do. They want perfect conditions. They want no one to contradict them, everyone to understand them, the past to be repaired, the present to cooperate, the future to guarantee security. They want a peace negotiated with the world, and since the world never signs that ridiculous contract, they live disappointed. Peace becomes impossible for them because they have placed it where it never should have been, outside themselves, in the hands of a partner, family, recognition, other people's behavior, success, external order. And then, when all of that fails, they feel life has stolen something from them. No, they handed it over themselves. Ralph Waldo Emerson, deeply influenced by the Stoic temperament, wrote that nothing can bring a man peace but himself when he chooses to remain faithful to his own inner law. That phrase seems obvious until you bring it into real life. Can you remain calm even when someone does not understand you? Can you stay steady even when no one agrees with you? Can you remain whole even when someone does not love you the way you wanted? Or does your stability depend so much on the outside that every disappointment dismantles you? That is where the truth shows itself, and it is not always pleasant. Many people suffer not only because of what is done to them, but because they have built their center on someone else's ground. This habit demands a serious break from emotional servitude. It means stopping the expectation that others will bring order to the chaos you have refused to govern. It means understanding that no one can give you lasting peace if your mind remains an open square to fear, attachment, and reaction. Yes, love can accompany you. Yes, companionship can bring relief. Yes, a just word can console. But none of that replaces the work of learning how to dwell well within yourself. If you do not know how to be with yourself, no outside presence will give you real stability. It will only distract you for a while. Seneca observed that the wise person is content within themselves, not because they despise others, but because they have learned not to depend on them for stability. That distinction is decisive. This is not about becoming cold or pretending you need no one. It is about not turning anyone into the main support of your peace. Because once you do that, you begin bargaining away your dignity so you do not lose whatever calms you. You tolerate the intolerable, beg for closeness, accept scraps, stay silent about what you should say, adapt yourself in humiliating ways, all out of fear of losing that external source of calm. And then you are no longer at peace. You are under submission. The irony is that the more you chase peace through other people, the more anxiety you create. You need signs, guarantees, proof, perfect consistency. You become hypervigilant, dependent, exhausting to yourself and to anyone who comes near you. How could you not suffer like that? You have turned the outside world into an altar and your inner life into an abandoned place. Stoicism reverses that logic. It forces you to return inward, to rebuild a foundation that does not collapse with every shift in emotional weather. To accept that some people will leave, others will fail you, many will not understand you, and even so you must remain a livable place for yourself. When you stop asking others for the peace that can only be born within you, something essential matures. You no longer relate from desperate need, but from a cleaner kind of presence. You can love without groveling, accompany without depending, let go without falling apart. And that changes everything, because at last you stop using people as anesthesia for your disorder. Emerson also wrote that serenity is the proof that a person has stopped looking outside for what can only be built within. That is where one form of silent slavery ends, and that is where a freedom begins that makes no noise, but holds up an entire life. Once you have brought some order to your mind, once you no longer fight what you cannot control, once you watch your thoughts, govern your reactions, endure discomfort, remember fragility, Examine yourself at night and stop begging for peace from the outside. A question appears that can no longer be postponed. What are you living for? Because a cleaner mind without purpose can simply become more efficient at spinning in circles. And emptiness does not disappear just because you control yourself better. It can remain there, elegant and silent, disguised as a proper routine. That is why all of this leads us to the 9th point, and perhaps the most uncomfortable of all. Live with purpose, even in the middle of chaos. Many people are not depressed only because of what they suffered. They are empty because they do not know why they get up in the morning. They move, fulfill tasks, respond, produce, distract themselves, survive, but they serve nothing higher than the impulse of the moment or their small daily urgencies. And when life strikes, they collapse easily because there was no deep direction holding up the structure. There was activity, but no meaning. There was busyness, but no duty. There was entertainment, but no purpose. And without purpose, chaos always seems bigger than it is, because it finds no structure within you strong enough to command it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning that he was made to do the work of a human being, and not to complain about it. That line has enormous force because it cuts at the root of the modern fantasy that you should only act when you feel inspired, motivated, or emotionally ready. No, purpose does not depend on your mood. Duty does not ask whether you feel brilliant today, whether you are feeling sensitive, or whether your inner weather is favorable. It simply expects you to do it. And that, though it may seem severe, saves many people from sinking into themselves. Because someone who knows what they must do today does not have so much time to kneel before their confusion. Viktor Frankl, shaped by extreme experiences in which human dignity was pushed to the limit, said that suffering ceases to be suffering in some way when it finds a meaning that transcends the immediate experience. That idea does not romanticize pain. It orders it. It places it inside a higher structure. Because when your life no longer revolves only around how you feel, but around what you must embody, build, protect, or serve, the blows do not disappear, but they no longer have the final word. Do you realize what that implies? You do not need to wait for chaos to leave before you begin living with firmness. You need a reason stronger than the chaos. This is where many people get lost, because they keep searching for purpose as if it were an intense emotion or a mystical revelation. No. Sometimes purpose begins in a far less glamorous and far more serious way. Taking care of someone, keeping your word, putting your life in order, doing your work well, building character, not wasting your days, becoming a more useful, upright, conscious presence in the world. Purpose will not always make you feel special. Very often it makes you responsible, and that is why so many avoid it. They would rather go on saying they feel lost than accept the concrete burden of living with direction. Zeno of Citium, founder of the Stoic school, taught that the goal of life is not to chase scattered pleasures, but to live in harmony with the reason that governs the universe. Translated into ordinary life, that means something very simple and very demanding. Stop living in fragments. Stop living only by reacting, desiring, escaping, and looking for relief. Start living in coherence with what you know makes you more worthy, because purpose is not a luxury for stable times. It is precisely what keeps you from dissolving when everything around you loses shape. A person with purpose can feel pain, fatigue, grief, fear, even confusion, but they are not left completely at the mercy of it. They have a task, they have an axis. They have a north star that does not change every time their emotions do, and that north makes them more resilient, more sober, harder to break. Chaos still exists, yes, but it no longer finds an empty soul where it can set up its kingdom. It finds a will occupied with something higher, and that makes an enormous difference. Living with purpose, even in the middle of chaos, does not mean having all the answers. It means stopping the use of unanswered questions as an excuse to live without direction. It means deciding that even if the world shakes, you will keep serving what you believe is right. That even if there is pain, you will not abandon duty. That even if you do not control the setting, you can still control the moral quality with which you move through it. And when a human being discovers that, emptiness begins to retreat. Not because life becomes easy, but because at last it stops being pointless. After everything we have covered, we arrive at the part that reframes the entire meaning of this video. Because the greatest mistake would be to hear these habits as inspiring ideas, nod along, feel a momentary sense of relief, and then return to exactly the same life that was producing your disorder. That is where many people turn even truth into another sedative. They consume clarity, but do not change structure. They collect tools, but do not build discipline. They talk a lot about healing and very little about practice. We have reached the 10th and final point of this video. Turn your life into a practice, not an endless search for help. Seeking help is not shameful. Sometimes it is necessary, legitimate, and human. The problem begins when help becomes an identity, a permanent refuge, a sophisticated way of postponing responsibility. Some people spend years looking for a new explanation, a new method, a new voice that understands them, a new promise of relief. They jump from content to content, from advice to advice, from diagnosis to diagnosis, as if transformation were going to happen through the accumulation of outside understanding. But no, there comes a point when continuing to search for help stops being openness and becomes avoidance, because you already understand enough. What is missing is not another explanation. What is missing is practice. Musonius Rufus said that philosophy should be taught as medicine for the soul and not as decoration for the intellect. That is the final blow. If what you hear does not make its way down into your conduct, then it is only decorating you from the inside. If you know a lot about peace but keep reacting the same way, if you understand fragility but keep living half asleep, if you talk about discipline but still obey every impulse, then you are not living a philosophy. You are consuming a language, and language will not rescue you. What rescues you is the deliberate repetition of acts that reform your character. Pierre Hadot explained that philosophical thought becomes real force only when it is translated into daily practices that reform perception. That is exactly what this final habit demands. Not just asking what is happening to you, but what you do each day with what is happening to you. Not only understanding your patterns, but interrupting them. Not being content with naming your chaos, but imposing a new form on your life. Because the way out is not in feeling endlessly accompanied in your wound. It is in training yourself until that wound no longer governs you. What good is it to recognize that your mind needs direction if tomorrow you let it run loose again? What good is it to accept that you do not control the world if you keep arguing with reality every day? What good is it to admire Stoicism if you never turn it into a schedule, into silence, into nightly examination, into temperance, into duty, into boundaries, into action? Transformation does not happen the moment you understand something. It happens the moment you decide to live according to it, even when you do not feel like it, even when no one is watching, even when it does not feel epic. And that is where almost everyone deserts. Ryan Holiday, translating this spirit into contemporary language, insists that excellence does not come from occasional inspiration, but from the deliberate repetition of high standards. It may sound less romantic than the promise of a grand revelation, but it is infinitely more useful. Because in the end, a worthy life is not built out of intense moments. It is built through sustained practices, through small acts that, repeated over time, teach your soul who is in command. Get up and remember your duty. Question the automatic thought. Choose not to react. Endure discomfort. Examine yourself at the end of the day. Begin again tomorrow. This is the point many people do not want to hear. No one is coming to save you from a life that you yourself keep organizing chaotically. No one can practice for you. No one can replace the repetition that forms character. No one can give you from the outside the inner authority that is born only when you prove to yourself again and again that you are capable of governing yourself. And that is not a sentence. It is a dignity. It is the best possible news for someone who is tired of depending. Donald Robertson notes that training the mind every day is just as essential as training the body, because without mental discipline, every difficulty becomes magnified. That is where the fantasy of external salvation ends, and something much stronger begins. Formation. You no longer live waiting for the next help, the next explanation, the next emotional rescue raft. You begin to live like someone who practices, like someone who understands that peace, strength, and clarity are not found. They are cultivated. And when you turn your life into that practice, you are no longer a person searching for relief at every hour. You are someone building yourself, and that difference completely changes the way you stand in the world. If you have made it this far, you are not someone who only wanted to feel better for a few minutes. You are part of a minority still willing to hear a truth, more demanding than easy comfort. Most people will keep searching for endless explanations so they do not have to change anything, keep calling their passivity a process and their inability to discipline themselves depth. But you have already seen something that cannot be unseen. Now the decision is simple and hard at the same time. Return to the old habit of asking for relief without transformation, or begin living like someone who forms themselves with consciousness, rigor, and dignity. But listening is not enough. Understanding is not enough either. What matters is what you do when this video ends and you are once again alone with your habits, your impulses, and the real structure of your life. That is why I want you to leave a declaration in the comments, one that does not sound like an empty phrase but like a real position. Write, "My life will be my practice," and add the country you are listening from. I want to know who is willing to stop chasing endless help and start building real character. I'm Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel does not exist to lull you with pretty words or entertain you while your life stays in disorder. It exists to remind you that you can still regain authority over yourself, that you can still think more clearly than most people, and that you can still live with a dignity this age has almost forgotten. If this message truly confronted you, share it with someone who needs to stop looking for salvation outside themselves and start waking up within. Subscribe and stay with this community if you know your path does not end with this video. We are not here to collect quotes. We are here to temper the soul. And what comes next may help you go even deeper into this way of living, because a stronger mind, a cleaner will, and a more conscious life are not built in a single day. The conversation continues, and perhaps the next step is exactly what you needed in order not to become who you used to be again.